Welcome back to Issues of Faith. We are talking with Dr. Learotha Williams, Associate Professor of African American and Public History at TSU, and we are talking about a letter that Dr. Martin Luther King wrote from a Birmingham jail. That's its name, Letter from a Birmingham Jail. He wrote it 56 years ago next month, 56 years ago in April. My goal is to kind of get a sense of what does this letter, I encourage everyone to read it, what does it say to churches today? And one of his lines in this letter is, "I have been so greatly disappointed with the white church and its leadership." And he says, "I do not say this as one of those negative critics who can always find something wrong with the church." So where is he going here? What's your sense of that?
When I hear that, I hear him chastising members of the religious community for veering away from what he saw as the true purpose of the church, because the church, in the way that it initially functioned, it was very much concerned with the downtrodden, with the oppressed, with the poor, people that operated outside of the margins. And when you look at the Gospels, in all four of the Gospels, you see images of stories of Jesus dealing with people that most people looked away from or didn't want to have anything to do with. People that were having a rough go of it. The church typically opened up its arms to these people. As you dig further into the New Testament, there's instructions to look after the widows and the orphans and so forth. So the church is supposed to be responsible, have a responsibility for the downtrodden.
And Dr. King, his father was a minister. He grew up in the church. He says in here he loved the church.
And his grandfather.
And his grandfather.
Right.
And he said when he started this movement, he thought churches would be among his strongest allies. But he found something very different. What is he?
And their silence oftentimes suggested that they were okay with what was going on. They were complicit with what was going on. In this letter, he talks about them being very concerned about the violence, but not being concerned about the episodes that caused the conditions under which people were living that contributed to the violence. So in it, he's challenging them in essence to do better. Okay, everything that he's doing is consistent in his mind with the ministry of Christ. That is, he's calling for equality. He's calling for everybody to be treated the same way. He's speaking out in the face of injustice. And he doesn't see them doing this. And when we look at the church, we expect them to, because in many cities they're powerful spaces, they're powerful institutions. We expect for them to look after the downtrodden, look after those that have an issue. But in his mind, the churches, the white church, if you will, had in essence become agents of segregation, agents of Jim Crow.
He says too many churches have been more cautious than courageous and have remained silent behind the security of their stained glass windows.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is that? Is that a message for today? What do you think?
When you speak out against injustice, you're moving out into a place that can be unknown, that can be uncomfortable. Particularly if you're a pastor of a church and a significant part of your congregation don't subscribe to your actions or don't subscribe to what you are doing, then you're risking losing your body. You're risking losing your authority. But he's encouraging them to be courageous. and that it's not going to be easy. And they're in Birmingham, right? And you have video images of people being beaten, people being arrested, fire holes. So there's some element of physical danger there. But he argues that this is what the church, this is the role that the church is supposed to play.
He does, and I mentioned this earlier, but now we're to the point where he says this: whenever early Christians entered a town, the people in power became disturbed and immediately sought to convict the Christians for being disturbers of the peace and outside agitators. And now, he says, so often the contemporary church is a defender of the status quo. What about that?
And as we look at his image of the church during his early days and compare it to what he saw in Birmingham, he saw something completely different. In many instances, the status quo, or the people who favored the status quo, saw the church as being something dangerous. That wasn't the case in Birmingham prior to his arrival, although there are some, and that's not to diminish what Fred Shuttlesworth and the others in the church were doing there. And they did have some white allies, but in his letter he states that he didn't get the support, he didn't see the support that he thought they should have. But his presence there was to fight injustice. And one thing that he did that I don't know if he really anticipated this going in, but he issues a call to the white church, to white moderates in there. He focuses on them as well to do better, because their silence, their inaction was dangerous for the fight for equality.
He does. He's been very disappointed by their silence and says that is more frustrating than those who are just overtly opposed. All right, so we only have about 2 minutes left.
Okay.
But so he ends the letter, I guess, on a more optimistic tone, even a little humor. He says, never before have I written such a long letter. What else can one do when they're in a jail cell? So it is a long letter, but it's just remarkable reading. I encourage everyone to read it. How do you see that he ends it?
His message at the end of the day was one of love. And he was very critical of the clergy. I mean, he goes through and he describes what they are doing, why they are there. He discusses the whole process of getting ready to come to Birmingham, the whole identifying injustice, purification. He talks about the process of them coming there. Then he chastises people that he thought were their friends and encourages them to do better. And it's interesting because you're supposed to be able to be frank with your friends. You're supposed to be able to give them instruction and advice, and you do it all in the name of love. So I think when we look at this letter, particularly at the closing of it, the unifying theme in it is love for one another. I think that's one of the commandments we was given, right?
All right, we have 30 seconds. Well, I can't even ask that. All right, so I just want to thank you.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Williams, I wish we had more time to talk about it. Thank you for coming on. I encourage people to read the letter and read the letter that resulted in Dr. King writing this. Both fascinating parts of our history, and there's plenty that churches today can take from it. Thanks to all of you for watching Issues of Faith. Thanks to you. We'll see you next time.